Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our live webinar on the topic of fraud prevention. My name is Steve Overcash. I'm with Georgia United Credit Union, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are excited to share some very practical information with you concerning fraud prevention. I will be moderating today's session for you. Joining me are two panel experts, also from Georgia United, Brad Hutchinson and T'Yanna Ridgeway. And now I'm going to give them a minute just to briefly introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name is T'Yanna Ridgeway. I'm a fraud manager here with Georgia United Credit Union's Risk Management Department.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brad Hutchinson. I work in our Information Systems Department. I'm the Senior Vice President of Information Services.
Well, thank you so much, Brad and T'Yanna, and thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. This is some very important information, and I would encourage each of you joining us today, listen very carefully. There'll be some practical information shared with you that I think you can directly apply to your life. Before we get started, here's a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Please keep yourself muted so that everyone can hear. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat as we go along, and we'll do our very best to address each one. Finally, we'll try to leave a few minutes at the very end for any additional questions you may have based on today's discussion. And be aware this content is provided for informational purposes only and should not be interpreted as legal advice on any of the subject matter that we talk about. So before we get started with our panelists, I kind of wanted to frame up for you today our discussion on fraud prevention. And it goes without saying that this is becoming a bigger and bigger problem that we all need to be aware of and actually keep on our radar. And just a few statistics that will kind of put this in perspective. So according to one report, scam and spam texts have defrauded Americans out of $13 billion so far in 2023. And if you go back a couple of years, in 2020, it was around $8 billion. And before that, in 2020, the number was around $3.5 billion. So as you can see, the amount of money lost to fraud is dramatically increasing every year as we're moving forward in time. In terms of the types of fraud and how they're committed, the most common ones were, out of the 1.1 million reports of identity theft last year, about 400,000 of those were related to credit card fraud. And in terms of how the fraudsters are targeting us, texts were the most common contact method criminals used at 22%. So 22% of the time, they were using text messages to commit fraud. Phone calls were next with 20%. And finally, emails made up 19% of that number. And here's something that's very remarkable. If you look at all of that, and you consider all of the text messages and the emails and the phone calls, actually out of all of that, 225 billion, they're estimated 225 billion spam text messages were sent out last year. That's a 150% increase from the previous year. And you know what? I think all of those text messages came to me the way my phone was blowing up. So this is a very, very important topic. And so we're going to kind of dive in just a quick second here and start discussing some of the things that we need to be aware of in terms of protecting ourselves. We'll talk about some red flags, and we'll talk about some of the things that Georgia United Credit Union does on your behalf of our members every day to protect us. So some real interesting topics here we're going to discuss. So let's dive right in. So Brad, let's first talk about some things, some red flags or some common schemes or methods that fraudsters commonly use to target us. And then as we discuss each one of these, let's talk about some practical tips that we can take to prevent ourselves from falling prey to those particular scams. So Brad, let's get started. So how about talking to us about some of the common scams that are occurring out there today?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. What Steve's been talking about is really called, in general, called social engineering. And that's when it's a scheme where someone will try to trick you into giving you information about yourself or about your company in order to defraud you, either directly try to get your money or sell your information to another group that will try to get your money. These can be done in a variety of ways. Steve mentioned a couple: through email, phone call, SMS or text messaging, or even in person. And there's a lot of different types of social engineering, and we'll talk about a few of them. But what these fraudsters do is they'll either impersonate someone you know in some cases. They will send emails needing help, and they sound really urgent. So they're really trying to play to your soft side, your sense of urgency, to try to get you to give them information they need to either access your account, access your company, things like that. And there's some things you can do just from a general awareness standpoint. One is being suspicious of any emails you get that are not from people you know or that you weren't expecting. Another thing you can do is never share your private or personal information through email or someone that calls you or someone you don't know. This includes name information, address, phone number, especially your usernames and passwords, those one-time codes that you're sent whenever you're trying to log in to your online banking site. Those should never be shared. And if you do receive a communication from a company that looks legit, but you have some questions about it, you can always call that company at the number that you know is good, or go to the website and look up an email or a different way to communicate with that company instead of replying to whatever you get. But also, if you feel like you are a victim of social engineering of any form from someone at Georgia United, please don't hesitate to call us and let us know. Our number is 888-493-4328. I mentioned that there's several types of social engineering. The main ones are things like quid pro quo, where you'll get a call and someone will want they'll want to send you money, and then you need to do something with that money. Well, what happens is the money they sent you isn't actually real, and then you've taken it out of your account, and then someone needs to get that money back. And that's when you get defrauded from that. There's romance scams. There's elder abuse scams. Where someone may call and say that your grandchild is in jail and they're in urgent need of money, things like that. And then one of the most prevalent types of social engineering scams is called phishing, and those are very widespread in our nation right now, and they're unfortunately very effective. And that's when you're sent an email or a text message, or even you get a phone call, and they are wanting you to go to a particular location, maybe a link, and they want you to click that link. And it could be when you click that link that malware is installed on your machine and they've got access to it and can do a number of things through that. Or they're wanting you to fill in information. Maybe it's a website that it looks familiar, but it's not actually the website you think you're at. So now you're providing a username, a password, things like that. So be wary of that. Any type of that communication is generally not legit. So if you do get a fraudulent message from Georgia United, like I said, contact us. Some ways to identify these fraudulent emails: misspellings. You would think that if they're trying to get you to do something, that it would look more legitimate than it does. But these fraudsters, they purposely misspell things to get through firewalls so that they'll end up in your email box. So your internet service providers, they're trying to protect you as well, just like we are. But the fraudsters have learned how to get past those firewall blocks to get to your email. So looking for misspellings, that's a common way to identify a fraudulent email or a phishing attack. Anytime you're being asked for your personal information, use extra scrutiny about who you're giving that to. Also, those URLs that you're being asked to click on, especially if it's one coming from Georgia United, you want to make sure that it's got an HTTPS in front of it. And then if you do click on the link, that there's a lock in your where you see your URL in your browser. That will help you know that is a secure website, and it's our secure website. And like I said, if you feel like you've been a victim of phishing, call us 888-493-4328, or send an email to security@gucu.org, and we can help you through this attack and provide any remediation if we need to.
Great. Those are great tips, Brad. And I wanted to zero in on just a couple things that you mentioned. And one of them is, it seems like when you get these text messages that are fraudulent and scams and fraudulent, they're wanting you to act with urgency. And so one of the things that seems to be very, very important, and you can speak to this, is whenever you will get, or whenever you do get an email or text message, whatever, you see a link in there, a good practice is stop. Just take a second, take a breath, and say, do I really want to click on this link? You can hover over it and see where it actually takes you to. So these are things that just should automatically pop up in a person's mind.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right. Check for spelling within the URL. So, our domain is gucu.org. They will try to spoof gucu.com or gucv because a V looks like a U. You want to look for those types of things. And it's much easier to fall victim to this on your mobile device than it is on a desktop, because in a desktop, you can just hover over the link and see where it's taking you. I would shy away from clicking on links that don't have the URL listed out. So if it's click here, I wouldn't click on it,
But great point again, and it just takes a second to kind of stop and kind of analyze what's going on, and then obviously can prevent a lot of fraud from happening just by doing that one step.
Sure.
So those are great practical tips for us, and we appreciate you sharing that. Let's kind of dive in to some other topics that are kind of related. So T'Yanna, what kind of ideas do you have that you might share along those same lines with us?
Yes, thank you, Steve. So once the fraudsters have your attention, as Brad mentioned, from some type of phishing scam, whether it's email, text message, or a phone call, their next goal is to try to get you to send the money to them. And as Brad mentioned, they do so by scaring you or making you feel as if you're going to miss out on something. What we're commonly seeing now are your money transfer scams. This seems to be a major thing with our fraudsters because they receive the money quickly. Once you hit send, the money has been sent to them. And in a lot of cases, it's hard to get that money back once it's been sent. So the services that they're using can vary from your A2A, which is an account to an account. They'll link an account to your account. You have your other services such as your P2P, which is person to person. Same thing, I'm sending money from me to you. And then you also have your wire transfers. So mainly things that are electronic, and also gift cards. And even now what we're seeing is where they're asking you to even go to local places where you can send money, such as your Walgreens or your Walmarts, because once that money is sent, as I mentioned, it's gone. So some of the things and tips that I would like to provide to members would be knowing who you're sending money to. Only send money to individuals that you know. And also be aware of making sure that the person who you know is truly who you know. A lot of times with the phishing attempts, fraudsters will impersonate people that you know as well. Technology is becoming something that is increasingly used amongst fraudsters. We use it for good, but fraudsters also use it for their intentions as well. So ensuring that if you receive that phone call saying that your grandchild has been involved in some type of trouble, that you truly know that it is your grandchild or your friend on social media who's reached out to you. Have you seen this person face to face and had that communication with them to know that you need to send the money to them? So always know who you're sending money to. The second tip I would recommend is make sure you understand how that service is utilized. A lot of time our fraudsters will grab your attention and they'll tell you to send funds through a service that you've never used before. So if you understand how the service is used, you'll understand the security features that are part of that service as well. So for example, we have our P2P service where you're sending money from you to someone else. We have security features with that, such as you receive your codes that tell you do not provide this code to anyone. So if you have a code that comes up and it tells you please do not share this code, do not share that code with someone. And we'll also say for Georgia United, we will never ask you for this actual code. Also, if there are any other type of security features such as passcodes or passwords that you and the other person would know, make sure that you are aware that only you and that individual who you know are the only people who should have that information for where you're sending it to.
Okay, and that's another great point too, and Brad kind of touched on this. So Georgia United will never call a member or whoever and ask for their passcode and their password and that kind of thing.
Correct.
So always be aware of that. And another good point that you brought up too, and Brad also touched on this, is if you're not sure, call the person. And again, these people fraudsters are trying us to act urgently without going through those steps that we know could help verify what's going on. And so just, again, take a breath, take a step back and say, let me call this person and actually figure out if that's really who is asking for this information, right? Okay, great. Thank you. Great points. So let's dive in a little bit on a couple other things. And what would you say about, because we mentioned at the very onset that credit card fraud is huge. So what advice would you kind of give to us about the use of a debit card and a credit card and the fraud that might be associated with that?
So treat your debit and your credit card the same way. I would protect it. Treat that the same way you would as if your bank account information. Sometimes I would even say your social at times. This is information that if someone else has it, it gets into the wrong hands. Of course, they can make purchases with that information. Your PINs for your cards, never provide that information to someone who should not be utilizing your card. That is the same thing as your username and your password and your PINs. Those are things that we will not ask for as well. We do not need that information. For your debit cards, holiday season is coming up. So a lot of us are using our debit and credit cards to go shopping. What I would recommend is make sure when you're doing your holiday shopping or shopping at any time, use those websites for places that you know are reputable. As Brad just mentioned, make sure you don't just click here. If you receive an email that shows up saying that there's a great deal for something at a store that they have, make sure you go to the actual store's website to enter in your information there. Also, with technology, you have the ability now to tap your card at places, tap your phone. Make sure if you're utilizing machines that offer that service, make sure you have completed out those transactions before walking away. By doing so, this allows for one, your transaction to be fully completed, and the person that comes up behind you does not have access to your account information by clicking continue.
Okay, and that's a great point. Those are great points too. And also, as you mentioned, be very, very careful about where and how you use your debit card. And a lot of people are going inside, like if they're at a gas station, they'll go inside and pay for their gas that way, as opposed to maybe using the pump, because there are still occurrences of, skimming devices and stuff still being put on.
Yes, and I would recommend if you are using a pump, as you say, for the gas, make sure do something as simple as just tugging on where you place your card, just to make sure that it's not loose. Look for anything that just stands out. Does it appear as if the padding has been torn? Something is connected there that you've never seen before.
Great points too. And I know personally too, a lot of times I'll make sure if I'm going to use my debit card, I'll make sure I'm actually seeing somebody physically use it, as opposed to walking away from the window or whatever. And just be cautious and careful about how you use your debit card. Great points. Appreciate that. And so again, and Brad touched on this earlier, if at any point, you suspect based on all these scenarios we've talked about, if you're a victim of any kind of a fraud or debit card, credit card fraud, that kind of thing, and Brad mentioned the phone number for Georgia United, what would you suggest? I mean, reach out to us, right?
Yes, reach out to us immediately. We also have the ability for those that have online services with us, sign up for online banking if you don't have online banking. If you check your account and you notice that there's a charge that has come through with your card that is not yours, you have the ability to go online and freeze your card. Freeze your card if you think you may have lost or misplaced that card. And then 2, you can close that card to prevent any additional transactions from coming through the account.
That's a great point too, because you mentioned we can do that ourselves. We can go online and go ahead and make that,
Yeah.
frozen, so we don't have any further issues at the time.
Correct. And contact us immediately.
Okay, great. And again, that's one of the things we do as a credit union. We're always watching out for our members. We want to make sure that they're protected and they're safe, and give them methods to, to act immediately, because there is a sense of urgency, right, when something happens. So we appreciate that. Anything else you would say about that? If not, let's move on to, I know money orders and check scams are a huge thing right now too. So let's talk a little bit about that.
So with your money order check scams, you would think with today's digital age that check fraud would be something that is decreasing. But if you've noticed here lately in the news, unfortunately, it's something that is increasing. For those of you who may have visited a local post office recently, you've noticed the different changes that have occurred there with you being able to drop off your mail, because people are stealing mail. They're stealing your checks from the mailbox, your own personal mailbox at home as well. So with that, you want to make sure that you protect yourself by doing certain things such as, utilize digital services such as bill pay to make your payments, so that way your check is not out there. Because what the fraudsters do is they will take that information and they do what's called washing your check. Cooking the check sometimes is what it's called. And what they'll do is they'll take that information where you've written your bill to AT&T for, let's say, $80, and then they'll go in, wash that information, make that check payable to themselves. They've either duplicated your signature, left your signature there, and they have pretty much change the amount, or they can create new checks based upon the account information that is on your checks. So make sure that you can start utilizing those services that where the transactions can come out of your account without the use of a paper check. Also with your checks, we'll talk about fraud scams. If it's too good to be true, sometimes it is. Whereas with the check scams, we have individuals who are looking for employment, or you think you've won the lottery, or you just randomly received a check in the mail. Always ask yourself, 1, should I receive this check? Do I know where this is coming from? What are they asking me to do? Have they asked me to send money back to them off of this check? Because what will happen is you deposit the check, and even if you're selling something online, you're depositing the check into your account. The fraudsters know that the funds you'll have funds to send back to them. And they're hoping to, once again, obtain those funds as quickly as possible before that check comes back returned on your account.
Great points. And there's so many tips that, that we would love to share with you. And by the way, there's a lot of information too, and we'll talk about this later, on our website, on Georgia United's website, with additional practical tips and things you can do. And I'll just give you a quick example. One of the things that I didn't know for a long time was either that if you use a gel-based ink pen when you're writing a check as opposed to a ballpoint pen, it makes it more difficult for the fraudsters to do that washing, like you're saying, of the check. So there's all kinds of really practical information, that's on our website in different forms, and we'll talk about that later. But these are just some real practical tips for our listeners here today, right? That they can actually put into practice and prevent some of this stuff from happening. So great examples, and we do appreciate that. So let's dive in a little bit now more in terms of some other general tips that we can use maybe to protect ourselves. And I know one of the things, and you kind of touched on this, both Brad and you did earlier. And so it's really a matter of just being aware of things that are going on around us, and specifically with respect to even like with our financial statements. And so what are some ideas or kind of practical things that we can kind of look at on an ongoing, regular basis, like checking our financial statements? What would you suggest for that?
We recommend check your account on a daily basis. This way you can ensure that any transactions that are coming through your account are transactions that you have conducted. Also, I would recommend going back to the mail theft that has occurred. Make sure you sign up for something such as e-statements. This way you can receive each month an email notification informing you that your statement is ready for review. This keeps your statement from actually being sent in the mail, and someone, if it gets into the wrong hands, they can see exactly where you've spent where you've conducted transactions and how much you may have inside of your account.
And that's a great point too. Again, because we touched on this so many times, it's a sense of urgency. And with those e-statements, you don't have to wait till the end of the month to receive. You can do that on a more frequent basis. So that's a great point too. And that's a service obviously that we offer and can actually help you in a lot of different ways. Let's talk a little bit about something that's kind of related. And this is something that we should be checking on a regular basis too. And that is our credit report. So let's talk a little bit about that and figure out how maybe that can help prevent some of the fraud from occurring as well.
Yes, a lot of times with our fraudsters as well, they want to get your information once again so they can obtain something that is for their benefit, but they didn't put in the work for it. So with your credit report, once they have your information, what they'll do is they'll go in and apply for new accounts, new loans under your name. So I would recommend to members to make sure that you're checking your credit reports on a regular basis. If you have services that allow you to do so, sign up for those services. Or what I would recommend is make sure that you also go in and do a security alert on your credit report. So that way, if your credit is pulled, someone has to verify your identity. Or you can do what's called a credit freeze. With a credit freeze, it pretty much does that. It freezes your credit. So therefore, if someone goes in and they try to pull your credit, even if you're trying to have your credit pulled and it's frozen, the only way someone can view your information is if you unblock that freeze. And it's really simple to do. You'll just go to the credit bureau websites or whatever service that you use for monitoring your credit, and you'll go in and do a security freeze. And it's real simple. If you just need to unlock your credit for some reason because you need to make a purchase, you can always go in and just unfreeze your credit. You can do what's called a temporary lift, and you can set the time frame for which you want to have your credit available. And then once that time frame has ended, the freeze automatically goes back onto your credit report.
Great. And honestly, that's some really, really practical information that we all really should consider seriously doing. Is freezing that credit. Because honestly, that's probably the one biggest single thing you can do to protect yourself from a lot of this occurring. Because when you do that, no one can take out, for example, a loan underneath your identity, not even yourself, until you unfreeze it. And it doesn't cost anything to freeze it or unfreeze it.
Correct.
And then in Georgia too, because of a state statute, you can also get a second report for free. So there's so many benefits of freezing your credit. And again, that's probably the single biggest thing you can do to protect yourself from a lot of these things that we've been talking about today. The other thing that's kind of closely tied to that, obviously, is your social security card and number. And so let's talk a little bit about that. I know, for example, if you go to a physician's office and you're filling out paperwork, and part of that is your social security number, that could be a document that could be left lying around on the table, easy for someone to kind of pick up. You need to kind of just think through some of these things perhaps. And if you don't put your social security number down, that's not a big deal necessarily. And there's other ways that they can obtain that information. But if it's sitting there on someone's desk, it's just easy for someone shoulder surfing or whatever to kind of pick up things. And I guess the point is, and both of you have touched on this, just kind of be aware of those kind of issues as you go through life. And there's some practical tips there to protect yourself. Wouldn't you say concerning your social security number?
Yes, I would recommend for your social security card, don't carry it around with you. If you happen to lose your wallet, that's something that your social security number, it identifies you. It tells who you are. All I need is your name and your social, your address. And for the most part, I have enough information to be able to take over your credit if it is not unfrozen. So you want to make sure that's not something that you keep around. As you mentioned, you never know who is around you. If you're someplace and you're asked to provide your social, make sure that you do so in a discreet manner. So that way it's not overheard by others, because you never know who may be around you.
Great points. And you talked about a security alert, and Brad, I'm going to ask you a couple questions here related to that. So in terms of a security alert, those are obviously good things to put in place. How can Georgia United help with that?
Sure. So we have a number of things that you can do to help in these areas to help protect yourself. The first one I would like to mention is, T'Yanna touched on a little bit earlier, is this tap to pay functionality, your mobile wallet. I would highly recommend using that, your debit and credit card. If it has the tap to pay option on it, you see that at a retailer, use that instead of inserting it or swiping it. Add your cards to your phone or your Apple Watch or your Android devices and use those to pay instead of using your actual cards. It is a lot more difficult to steal information that way. You have to be very, very close. And if someone were close enough to you, you would know it. And it would raise a red flag. Another thing you can do is enable the biometric sign-in on your devices. Make sure either the Face ID, fingerprint ID, something like that. Make sure you're not having to enter in a code, and please don't have your phone unlocked to where anybody can just swipe up and get into your device. On our online banking app, we have two-factor authentication. Use that, and I highly recommend using an authenticator app, which is a separate app to download. Some common ones are Authy, Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator. I personally use that for a number of different websites. For online banking at Georgia United, no one can get that code unless you give it to them, and please don't give it to anyone. Another way is to sign up to receive alerts in online banking. We created a near real-time alert process around this time last year. It's been extremely successful. We just sent out our millionth alert on there. We have different types of alerts. Our security alerts you're defaulted into, so if any changes occur or high-risk transactions, you're going to get notified. But you can also opt into transaction alerts. Highly recommend doing that, to where if your card is used, you are immediately notified that what the transaction was, the amount, the merchant, everything. And if you see anything suspicious there, you can immediately call or go in and put a freeze on that card so it can't happen again. And then another thing you can do to protect yourself, sign up for scam alerts. Knowledge is power. The best way to protect yourself from fraud is knowing what fraud is really popular right now. And you can do that through the FTC. Their website is consumer.ftp.gov/scams.
Great information. And I want to kind of zero in on a couple of things that you mentioned and talk about. And I'm going to kind of interweave here a few questions that we have come in from the chat. So based on fraud, you talked about that, and you talked about some of the alerts. And both of you have kind of touched on this as well. How do I go about verifying whether something is really legitimate or not? So let's talk about the fraud alerts. We had a question that came in that talked about they received a fraud alert and they weren't sure if it was legitimate or not. And maybe even it coming from Georgia United, and maybe in a holiday weekend or whatever. What steps should I take to kind of make sure I know where this fraud alert is coming from, and how do I verify this really legitimate?
I think you can always call us back. We do have after-hour support to help in those situations. So if you're ever receiving communication from Georgia United and you're not confident that it's us, hang up or don't reply to the text message and call our number.
And there's actually a methodology for them to send in a scam alert or an address for that.
Yeah, security@gucu.org.
Okay, great, awesome, thank you for that. And again, these are just real practical tips. So in the unfortunate event, if one of those things happen, there's a quick way of addressing it. And you talked about that too. So another question came in about fraud that may be occurring on the weekends or holidays. So that's always available for someone to access and use that methodology for reporting something that's.
And the technology to be able to freeze your card as well, I think is valuable there too. So if there is suspected fraud, you can shut your card down.
Okay, great. And again, the sense of acting with urgency. That's a very important thing that we've talked about several times already. I always want to emphasize that the sooner you can get on top of that and get that, alert somebody, obviously, that's going on, the better off you are. Let's talk about, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, and we're going to kind of dive into this in a little bit more detail. Because Brad, I know you're really familiar with some of the things that we're doing behind the scenes to proactively protect our members. One of the questions that came in was the dark web. We keep hearing a lot about that. And we're told that a lot of our information is out there on the dark web. And what should we kind of think about that? How should we kind of process that?
Yeah, unfortunately, in the industry, there's been so many businesses that have been attacked and information stolen from them. You hear about it all the time. You probably receive letters in the mail and you get offers to sign up for these services that will monitor your identity and your credit. Sign up for those services, especially because the company that has been targeted and attacked has to pay for that service for you. And if you just throw the letter away and don't sign up, you're not protected. Yes, all that information gets sold. Anything that is acquired through those breaches gets sold. But you can protect yourself by doing things like T'Yanna mentioned, freezing, keeping your credit frozen where they can't open up new lines of credit in your name. You can freeze your cards when you know you're not using them. Monitor, sign up for online banking and look at it daily. Look at your transactions. Make sure, I probably look at mine, 10 to 20 times a day, because it's so easy. You just click the app and their face signs you in and you can see what transactions are coming through. Sign up for alerts. Really being able to identify fraudulent activity as fast as possible and then reporting it is the key there. But sign up for those services that you get in the letters.
Yeah, no, obviously great point. And actually, I've had this, I know of family members and others that have had that happen to them. And again, if someone fraudulently obtains your information and they're making transactions at a lot of different places, that's actually happened, again, that I've known personally. And you can see all those things start popping up. Those are immediate red flags. We talked about that you can, recognize right away and start taking action. So those alerts are obviously super, super helpful. And one of the things too, we had a question come in. I just want to kind of tackle this while we're kind of in the neighborhood. We talked about freezing your accounts and stuff. Can they freeze their credit card as well as their debit card?
Yes, they should be able to go online and your card number will show and you'll just follow the steps to freeze my card or report my card lost or stolen.
In our online banking app, it's in the menu under services and then card services.
Okay, great. Great information. And again, that's a good point too, is we make all this information readily available on our website, gucu.org, and so that they can go out and do these things. And I guess if you'd repeat that FTC scam alert website, Brad,
Sure. It's consumer.ftc.gov/scams.
And again, to that FTC website, I know is a great place to do it. In the event that you've been a victim, it'll walk you through all the different steps that you need to take to kind of protect yourself and fill out reports and that kind of thing. So those are really good websites to use and be aware of as well. So obviously great information you talked about today so far already. And we do really appreciate you taking your time to share all this information with us. Because again, these are just practical tips that should be kind of on your radar on a frequent basis. So let's, a couple of things you talked about, Brad, and I kind of want to zero in on them too, in terms, and T'Yanna, you mentioned this as well. So what are the things some of the things that Georgia United encourages our members to do, such as, strong passwords, two-factor authentication? I just want to kind of summarize that for our participants here today too.
Sure. Yeah, we know like passwords, the strength of your passwords, it can be frustrating having to remember when you do symbols and lowercase and uppercase, things like that. But it's so important to have a good, strong password. And we do require strong passwords in our online banking. If you have any website that you're on where you're having to store your credit card information or any personal information, make sure you use a strong password. We also require two-factor authentication. Anytime you log in from a new device or a certain time is going by, you're going to get a one-time passcode on your account, and that's something you should never share, never give away. I've mentioned real-time alerts. Please go in and sign up for those. They're under in the app or on the desktop on our website and our online banking. It's under the menu, services, and then alerts. And it's very simple. You just toggle on. You can do SMS alerts, email alerts, or you can have just an app or an alert pop up within the online banking app, letting you know that a transaction has occurred. And there's a lot of other information reminding you of loan payments due, things like that. And we also have some technology that's built into our online banking that is there to learn your behavior as you're using online banking, learn where you log in from, learn what you do inside of there. It's some AI, artificial intelligence able technology that's going through and scoring your interactions with the application. And what that does is it protects you. So if someone does log in from an area that you've never even been to, then it's going to prompt you for further scrutiny, or it may block that fraudster from logging in. Or if they are inside and you've never transferred money a certain way, it's going to challenge that. So Georgia United is constantly looking for ways to protect our members. We have enhancements coming soon. We're going to do further enhancements to our alerts to offer more options for our members. We're building a member verification tool to where when our members call us, we can send a code either through the online banking app or through text message to verify that it is them and not a fraudster. Possibly the reverse as well, to where if Georgia United calls you, then you can generate a code to us to know it's us. And these items will help. You know, fraud is not going away. Like Steve mentioned earlier, it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. The fraudsters are going to keep finding new ways, and we're going to keep finding new ways to protect, something Georgia United is heavily invested in.
Great, that's awesome. And it sounds like we're really doing a lot of things on the behalf of our member on a proactive basis. So we're trying as best we can to keep that one step ahead of them, which I know is difficult, but it's comforting to know that all those things are being investigated and constantly being changed and updated so that we're always keeping our members safe. So that's a great point. And I think something we all need to pay attention to. T'Yanna, what would you add from your perspective in terms of, I know maintaining the security of our members' personal information is our top priority. And I kind of want to reemphasize, and if you would do that for us too, that what are some of the things that we're doing or will not do? Like we will never call them or email someone and ask for that type of personal information, right?
Correct. So yes, make sure that you understand what we will not ask for. We will not ask you for your PIN. We will not ask you for your passwords to things. Those are things that you should know, and only you should know for your online banking. We will not ask you, if we're calling you directly, we're not going to ask you for your mother's maiden name. If you feel as if this call may not be from Georgia United, even if you see the number, because fraudsters do what's called spoofing. Don't hesitate to stop that call. We appreciate it if we are calling you to let you know. We will appreciate it if you stop us and you treat us and think that we're the fraudster and say, you know what, I am going to disconnect this call and I'll call back in to ensure that you are from Georgia United. What I have recommended to some members is, even if you see the number, don't do what we used to call redial. Dial the number directly yourself, because sometimes when you hit that call back just by clicking on the number to call back because you think it's us, it's actually rerouting you back to the fraudsters.
That's a great point too. So go to the website or whatever and find, the number, the official number for a place of, and we talked about that earlier too.
I would say too, ask for the person's name so that when you do call back, you can ask for that person by name and verify that they're employed here.
Great points. So we've talked about a lot of different things today. And again, a lot of this information is out there on our website. There are some other websites that are good to kind of visit and look at for additional information. So let's kind of talk about a few of those, and I'll kind of throw that out there to either one of you. You mentioned the FTC website, obviously, is a great place to go. What are some other websites that people can frequently visit to?
I would say IC3.gov, that's the Internet Crime Complaint Center. That's run by the FBI. So if you find yourself being a victim of any type of fraud scam, make sure you go to that website. The more we get the information out there of people being victims, which we don't want, but the more information, it helps to collaborate this information together so the fraudsters can be brought down.
Okay, great. And so we mentioned too that some of these websites, in addition to ours, will have some steps that people need to take if in the unfortunate event they become a victim. So we talked about the need to act immediately, to act with urgency. Run through a couple of the other steps, if you will, that they should think about doing.
Make sure you also check, we talked about acting urgent, check your account, make sure that everything there is okay. Make sure you lock down all your accounts, not just the account that, say, Georgia United, you were called about Georgia United. If you have any accounts anywhere else, double check those accounts. Make sure that, as we mentioned before, check your credit report. Look for not only accounts that may have been open, but also look for inquiries as well on those credit reports to ensure that no one has attempted or is in the process of attempting to open up something in your name.
That's a great point, because actually we do these types of sessions and seminars and webinars all the time. And I've actually had people come up to me and say that when they checked their credit report, they found out that someone had purchased a automobile, or two automobiles actually, in a house in a foreign country. That's one of the first places they found out about that, because it appeared on their credit report. And so obviously a great point to go ahead and freeze it, but also check it on a regular basis, because that's when you might become aware of some of these things that might be happening to you. And you touched on a couple other things, maybe alerting the authorities, the police report is necessary. There's places on the FTC website that you can do an affidavit. So there's a number of steps that they can go through and take to.
Yes, and we also have that information as well from the Federal Trade Commission's website. We also have a booklet that we can provide to the members. We can send it via email to them electronically, and it will give them the step-by-step process for what they will need to do if they ever become a victim of identity theft.
Okay. So that's great. So we're watching out for them, proactively doing things to protect them, and then we're also providing steps. And yet, unfortunately, again, if something should happen, so we're trying to cover all aspects of that. One of the questions that came in too from the chat, that someone had received an email for feedback, and they had never actually been there. Or does Georgia United send out feedback or requesting feedback for surveys and that kind of thing?
We do, yeah. We will do general membership surveys, and we'll do specific surveys for things like we just recently did an online banking survey for feedback on online banking, and that went out to members who do use online banking and who don't, to get general information about maybe why they don't use our online banking and things like that.
Okay. And it's presented in such a manner they know it's coming from us, and
It doesn't ask for any personal
Okay, great. So just a generic type survey. And then one of the other questions that we had that came in was to repeat the FTC scam alerts website. If you would go ahead and do that.
It's https://consumer.ftc.gov/scams.
Okay, great. And by the way, too, we'll be publishing this event, this webinar, out on our website in the future, so people can see that. But again, you mentioned a great point there too, Brad, and that gets back to that HTTPS. S meaning secure. Look for that. Look for the lock sign. So those are all ways, again, just as a reminder, things that people should look for to protect themselves. This is kind of in terms of wrapping up all of this. I'm going to kind of let each of you, if you will, just kind of give a quick summary of some of the things we've talked about. Just highlight a few things again for our members here and other people listening in on this webinar. Just a kind of quick summary, just kind of hit the high points for us.
I would say sign up for alerts. That's huge. Make sure you have strong passwords. Always look through your transaction history. Don't wait for your statements at the end of the month. Try not to get things sent to you through the mail. And I know Tiana is probably going to say this too, but if something does happen, contact us immediately.
Okay, great.
And I would also add in, remember that we will not call, text, or email you asking for your username, your passwords, and your PINs. Thus, that is information that should be kept with you, and that is not something that we will ask for.
Right, great points.
I would say too, we will never ask you to send us money.
Yes.
We don't have a Cash App, a Venmo, anything like that. We would never ask you to send money to us.
Great point, because I know that type of scam is occurring quite frequently out there today. So something to be aware of. And again, there's a reason for that. I mean, we're looking out for our members' best interest. We want to protect them to the greatest extent we can. And so we're doing things like that to kind of make sure that those things are kind of shored up. And the other thing I would say, and both of you touched on this, take advantage of all those applications and services and products that we do provide. The bill pay. I mean, that makes things a lot more secure. Actually, there's a lot of side benefits to that as well, which we didn't touch on today as well. But obviously, paying bills on time can dramatically increase your credit score. So there's a lot of additional benefits to those services that we offer, like bill pay, in addition to security. So again, please take advantage of all of those types of services that we offer, the alerts, the bill pay, all the electronic, the statements, electronic. Those are all things that we do to kind of actually help in a lot of different ways for our members. So we're going to see if we have any additional questions that came in from the chat session, but we do appreciate certainly you taking the time to share all this information with us. And again, the big thing too, I think, is to be aware of the different options that you have for paying, credit card versus debit card. We've talked about that. One of the other things that came in as a question is IC3.
So that is for the Internet Crime Complaint Center.
Okay.
And basically what that is, if you have any type of internet crime, such as someone goes into your online banking, you can also report it there. So report it to your local police, and you can also report it there as well. And it helps with their collections for when they are actually doing their investigation.
And that's a great point too, because we need to kind of send in, when these things happen to us, the more the information that we can send along is helpful to people to kind of figure out how to prevent some of it. Let's talk about, we didn't touch on that very much. Let's talk about, so if someone thinks that they've received a scam email or a fraudulent email, what should they do? Obviously not click on any links within the email, but what should they, can they forward that to somebody to?
Yeah, if it looks like it has come from us, forward it to security@gucu.org.
Okay, security.gucu.org. Okay. Security@gucu.org. So that will be a way that they can notify us if they are seeing any types of fraudulent activity. And again, the more that we can be aware of anything that's happening to our members, we want to, in a secure way, be aware of that.
And I would also add in, share the information. As Brad mentioned earlier, knowledge is power. The more that you know, share that information with someone else so they can also be protected as well.
Okay, great.
That's a good point. There's a couple of websites that you can go to that these individuals create these websites just to help educate people on what's going on in technology right now. One, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Clark Howard. It's just, was it clark.com?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, clark.com. And then the other is, it's a website dedicated to recent technology trends. And that's, it's Komando, KOMANDO.com. It's just some good articles and just to keep yourself kind of up to date and speed of what's going on in the technology industry, because a lot of this comes from that, right? As technology changes, Tiana mentioned earlier, we use it for good. Some people use it for bad, but knowing what is out there, what's going on right now can help a lot.
And that's a great point. You speak of technology changing. All of us are so many times using our cell phone now to conduct business. So let's talk about that a little bit too, because I wanted to zero in on that because all of us are doing that. And Brad, you touched on this a little bit already. So if we typically are conducting some type of financial business with our cell phone, then all of a sudden we go to our laptop to do it. You had touched on this. So that's a point where we have systems that will detect a difference in origination, if you will, right? And so let's talk a little bit more about that and maybe some tips for using your cell phone to do any kind of financial transaction.
Yeah, I like the cell phone because it has the, most cell phones have either the facial recognition or fingerprint recognition. And I think that's a better way to go when you're trying to use your mobile app or to use your online banking applications to do it through mobile, because it's just more secure, right? That's you, someone else that got your phone, their face isn't in your phone, so they wouldn't be able to get in. And also using the strong passwords, like I said, for when you're not on there. And we do, you know, in the background, there's technology running. Like I'm the type of person where I log into both. I do my desktop and I do my mobile app. Well, it knows that. But if I never use my desktop and only ever use mobile, the first time I try to use desktop, it would be more scrutiny for me trying to get in. So that technology, with artificial intelligence and the way that it's changing, we're looking at that technology all the time. How can we integrate that into our products to serve our members?
Right. Because, and from a practical perspective, let's just kind of talk about that a little bit. So it might introduce a two-factor authentication if it's noticed that you're on a different device and that kind of thing. So those are all real good
Passcodes sent to you.
practical tips. Well, again, unless we have any further questions come in from our participants here on the webinar, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to kind of share this information with us. And we trust that you've gotten some very practical tips, those that have joined our webinar here today, to kind of protect themselves. Some of the things that Georgia United constantly does on your behalf to protect them. And again, please visit our website. There's a lot of additional information out there on a lot of these different topics that we've discussed today. So take advantage of that. And we certainly appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to view our webinar. And look at our website. There'll be future events similar to this that we might do in the future. Keep an eye on that. And but again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a great afternoon.